All right, everyone, settle in, maybe dim the lights. Because tonight we're diving headfirst into places that are supposed to be sterile, safe havens of healing. But what happens when the very walls designed to save lives become silent witnesses to something else? Welcome to a journey into the darkest corners of hospital hallways. We're talking about those late-night shifts, the eerie quiet of a lockdown, the moments when the hum of medical equipment is drowned out by a whisper that shouldn't be there. Hospitals, by their very nature, are places of intense emotion, life, death, fear, relief. Is it any wonder that sometimes an imprint of those emotions, a spectral residue, might just linger? We've all heard the urban legends, the hushed stories shared by weary nurses and doctors after a particularly grueling shift. But tonight, we're not just brushing past them. We're going to explore 3 specific accounts, stories that come from the heart of these institutions during their most vulnerable moments, lockdowns. These aren't just creaking doors or flickering lights that can be easily dismissed. These are experiences that have left indelible marks on the people who lived through them. Accounts of encounters that defy logical explanation and send a shiver down your spine. So if you're easily spooked, consider this your official warning. We're about to peel back the curtain on events that blur the line between the rationale and the truly terrifying. From ghostly patients who refuse to check out, to staff members who vanish under the most unsettling circumstances, and patients who find themselves sharing their room with more than just a roommate. These are the stories that will make you think twice about wandering alone at night, especially within the echoing corridors of a hospital after dark. Are you ready? Because the doors are locking behind us. Our first story comes from a nurse named Sarah, who worked the night shift at St. Michael's, an older hospital with a wing that, let's just say, had. During a particularly quiet lockdown, initiated due to a security concern in a nearby neighborhood, Sarah was doing her rounds. The halls were unnervingly silent, the kind of quiet that amplifies every tiny sound, the drip of an IV, the hum of a distant generator, her own footsteps. As she passed room 213, a room that was supposed to be empty, she caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye. She paused, thinking maybe a patient had been moved without her knowledge. She peered into the darkened room. There, sitting on the edge of the bed, was the faint outline of a man. He was elderly, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned hospital gown, and he seemed to be staring intently at the window. Sarah, though a seasoned nurse, felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She knew with absolute certainty that no patient was assigned to that room. She called out softly, "Sir? Are you all right?" But the figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge her presence in any way. It just sat there, a silent, ethereal sentinel, taking a deep breath, trying to rationalize what she was seeing. Perhaps a trick of the light, a reflection, fatigue playing games with her mind. Sarah stepped closer to the doorway. As she did, the air in the hallway around room 213 grew noticeably colder, a stark contrast to the otherwise regulated temperature of the hospital. The figure remained still and silent. She fumbled for her master key card to open the door fully, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a feeling anymore, this was something she was. The moment her fingers brushed the lock, the figure slowly turned its head towards her. Sarah described its face as indistinct, shadowed, but she could feel an overwhelming sense of sadness emanating from it. There was no malice, no threat, just a profound, lingering sorrow. She froze, her training momentarily forgotten, replaced by a primal fear. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. The lockdown alarms were still a distant, muffled sound, a world away from the chilling reality in front of her. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure began to fade. It didn't walk away. It didn't disappear in a puff of smoke. It simply dissolved, like mist in the morning sun, until the room was empty once more. The cold spot lingered for a few moments longer, then gradually dissipated. Sarah never saw the figure again, but for the rest of her time at St. Michael's, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever she passed room 213, especially during the dead of night. The hospital officially had no record of any patient matching that description dying in that room, but the older staff whispered tales of a man who had passed away decades ago, waiting for a family that never came. Next, we delve into a case that's less about a spectral encounter and more about a chilling, unexplained vanishing act. Dr. Aris Thorne was a brilliant, albeit somewhat eccentric, cardiologist at City General Hospital. He was known for his dedication, often working late into the night, poring over patient files or conducting research in his secluded office in the older, less trafficked wing of the hospital. One evening, the hospital went into an unexpected lockdown, not for an external threat, but an internal one, a critical system failure that sealed off sections of the hospital automatically. Dr. Thorne was last seen on security footage heading towards his office around 11:30 p.m. Just minutes before the lockdown protocols engaged. He was carrying a stack of files and his customary cup of tea. The lockdown lasted for nearly 3 hours. When the all clear was given and staff began to move freely again, Dr. Thorne was nowhere to be found. His colleagues initially assumed he'd simply gone home, perhaps finding a way out before the lockdown fully sealed his wing, though that seemed unlikely given the stringent security measures. However, when he didn't show up for his morning rounds, concern began to grow. A search of his office yielded unsettling clues. His teacup was on his desk, still half full and now cold. The files he was carrying were scattered haphazardly on the floor, as if dropped in a hurry or during a struggle. But there were no signs of forced entry, no indication of violence. The only way in or out of that section during the lockdown was through secured, monitored doors, and none of them showed Dr. Thorne exiting. The most disturbing clue, however, was found on his archaic desktop computer, which he preferred over the newer hospital systems. The screen was open to a single cryptic email he seemed to have been in the middle of composing. It was addressed to a colleague in a different department, and the body simply read, "They know I've found it. The passages beneath are not what we thought. If I'm not back by..." The message cut off abruptly, as if he'd been interrupted mid-sentence. The hospital, of course, officially denied the existence of any accessible passages beneath that wing. Security footage from the hallway outside his office was reviewed countless times. It showed him entering, but it never showed him leaving. Hours of footage during the lockdown revealed nothing but an empty corridor. Dr. Aris Thorne was declared a missing person. Some whispered he'd stumbled upon something he shouldn't have, something hidden within the hospital's foundations. Others speculated a mental break, a clandestine escape. But with no evidence, no trace, his disappearance remains a chilling enigma, a story that makes the staff at City General uneasy whenever a lockdown is announced. Chapter 3. The Shadow in Room 402. Our final story shifts the perspective to that of a patient. Mark, a man in his late 30s, was recovering from a routine surgical procedure at Northwood Community Hospital. His recovery was going well, but his nights were plagued by something far more sinister than post-operative pain. The first time he saw it, he thought it was a side effect of the medication. He woke up in the dim light of his private room, the kind of light where shadows play tricks on your eyes, but this was no trick. Standing in the far corner of the room, near the window, was a figure. He described it as tall, unnaturally so, and incredibly thin. It was featureless, a pure, deep shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, almost like a void, in the shape of a man. It didn't move, it didn't make a sound, it just stood there, observing him. Mark tried to call out, to reach for the nurse's call button, but a paralyzing fear gripped him. He felt an immense pressure in the room, a heavy, suffocating presence that seemed to emanate from the shadowy entity. He lay there, frozen, his eyes locked on the figure, until he eventually succumbed to an exhausted, uneasy sleep. The encounters continued for the next 2 nights. Each time, Mark would wake up around 3 a.m., the infamous witching hour, to find the shadow man in his room. Sometimes it would be in the same corner, other times it would be closer to the foot of his bed, seemingly inching nearer with each visitation. He tried telling the nurses, but they, understandably, attributed it to his medication or stress. They offered him sleeping pills, which he reluctantly took, but the figure still appeared. a silent, terrifying sentinel in his drug-induced haze. On his fourth night, desperate and sleep-deprived, Mark decided to stay awake. He kept the small bedside lamp on, hoping the light would deter whatever it was. For hours, nothing happened. He was just starting to relax, thinking maybe it was over, when he felt it, that familiar oppressive coldness seeping into the room. He looked towards the corner, and there it was, undeterred by the lamp. This time, however, it seemed to his wakefulness. It slowly tilted its head, an almost imperceptible movement, but one that sent a fresh wave of terror through Mark. He finally managed to cry out a strangled gasp that brought a night nurse rushing in. As the nurse flicked on the main overhead lights, the shadowy figure seemed to recoil, then rapidly dissolved into the now banished shadows of the room. Mark was frantic, trying to explain what he saw. The nurse, though skeptical, did a thorough check of the room and agreed to leave the main lights on for the rest of the night. The figure didn't return. Mark was discharged the next day, profoundly shaken. He never found an explanation for what he saw, but he remains convinced that something deeply unsettling shared his hospital room during those terrifying nights. So, there you have it. 3 stories plucked from the sterile, yet often unsettling environment of hospitals during lockdowns. From a spectral patient who hasn't quite left her post, to a doctor who vanished into thin air amidst cryptic clues, and a patient who found himself with a terrifying, shadowy roommate. These accounts, whether you choose to believe them as literal paranormal events or as products of extreme stress and isolation, certainly paint a chilling picture of what can happen when the normal rhythms of a hospital are disrupted. What is it about these places of healing that also seems to attract the inexplicable? Is it the sheer weight of human emotion, the pain, the fear, the hope, the loss, that somehow soaks into the very bricks and mortar, creating echoes of what once was? Or are there perhaps moments when the veil between worlds thins, especially in places so intimately acquainted with life and death? These stories are a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are not just in our imagination, but may lurk just beyond our understanding, in the quiet, locked-down corners of the world. Thank you for joining me on this unsettling journey. Whether these accounts leave you with a sense of unease or a healthy dose of skepticism, they undeniably tap into a primal fear of the unknown, especially in places where we expect to be safe. Next time you hear the echoing silence of a hallway or see a shadow flicker in your peripheral vision, you might just wonder. Stay safe, and remember to always keep an eye out for the unexplained. Until next time, try not to think too hard about what might be sharing your room in the dark.